Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all understand the importance of mental and physical well-being and proper recovery for top-notch performance. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. In hundreds of locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/bluewire to learn more and find a center near you. That's unifydhealing.com/bluewire. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment and before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, including EE System.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margalus, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Thursday night, April 18th, 2024, as we bring you a new episode. Can you believe it? The Chicago White Sox won a game. It didn't seem like it was legal for them to do so, but they finally won their third game of the season, winning Game 2 of their straight doubleheader against the Kansas City Royals on Wednesday. We'll recap that series against the Royals by focusing our attention on the Major League Baseball debuts of pitchers Nick Nastrini and Jonathan Cannon. What worked for them against the Royals? What can they improve upon in their next starts? And do they have staying power in the majors? Also, the White Sox have a Martin Maldonado problem, the move over to Stadium for 2025 telecasts, and preview this weekend's series as the White Sox visit the Philadelphia Phillies. Joining me are Sox Machine's beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margalus. And for a lot of our podcast listeners, I know you guys are going to have to take a break from listening to the new Taylor Swift album. It's a big day in the music industry, and James, I don't know if you know this, but Jim is a big Swiftie.
Is that right?
I'm married to one, so I have a lot of knowledge by osmosis here.
Well, obviously, that's what's going to be played at the house, right? Against your will?
Yep. Yeah, I'll be hearing plenty of it. Yep. And also, I mean, she, is a big deal in Nashville. Last time she was touring through here, in Centennial Park, I guess she sponsored a bench, and there was a line. I don't know.
Sponsored the bench?
How many people? Yeah, just like
like a millionaire, a bench.
Yeah. Well, just she's been around a lot of places, but there's like a bench that has her name on it. And when she was in town for the tour, all the Swift, I don't know how many, like hundreds of Swifties were lined up to take a photo with this bench. So her impact here is large and small when it comes to where you can find her and where you can find her fans suddenly gathering and not realizing like, oh, that's she did something here or shot a video here or took a photo here, and that's why everybody else is here.
I can't make fun of them because I just went to New Zealand and did that with Lord of the Rings locations, so I get it, including falling off a hill in Wellington, New Zealand. That was
falling off a hill,
but a bench in Nashville.
I can't make fun of them because I was so obsessed with the White Sox growing up that I decided to make it my career. So it was really past judgment.
Well, enjoy that new album, which is most definitely about her ex-boyfriend, which kind of follows the themes of all the albums for Taylor Swift, but I'm sure it's very enjoyable and we played nonstop. But thank you so much for taking a break from listening to the newest Taylor Swift album to listen to this Sox Machine podcast episode. And like I mentioned in the intro, shockingly, the White Sox won another game this season. They're now 3-15. They're only 9.5 games back of the Cleveland Guardians for first place in the American League Central, which is kind of impressive. 18 games of the season, and you're already 9.5 games back of first place. the offense is now averaging more than 2 runs per game. They're averaging 2.11 runs per game. The run differential is only minus 54. They're on pace to give up 828 runs for those interested in my steak dinner bet. The side note here, the White Sox are only 3.5 games back of the Minnesota Twins. Twinkies, I'm not concerned about you guys just yet, but I'm a little surprised by that. That's not a good mark for Minnesota to start the season. Anyways, the low scoring strategy finally worked, Jim. The White Sox finally won their third game 2-1, and this is the moment now the season completely turns around, right?
As long as they score 2 runs, they have a chance. 1 run, 0 runs, not going to work. 2 runs, maybe. Yeah, you're looking at the standings. You mentioned the AL Central standings and the run differential, and the number that most jumps out to me when I look at the White Sox 3-15 record, and then you rearrange it by league, and they're all the way at the bottom, but 38 runs scored. Like, I use Oakland as my barometer for just what a terrible team is doing or what a terrible team looks like. And Oakland has scored 56 runs. They have scored the second fewest, but still 18 more than the White Sox have scored. And I guess they played one more game. So maybe like there's one game where they had an 18-run outburst, and that explains the margin. But that's really what we're looking at. Those are the depths to which the White Sox have sunk.
Has anyone on the offensive side or position player side, James, are they panicking about the offensive production? Obviously, nobody can be happy with the few runs the White Sox have scored.
Has anyone talked to me and said, like, oh, Jesus, do you have any ideas?
They're not asking for your ideas, but just maybe off the record saying, this sucks. Like, we are in bad shape.
This sucks. I thought a telling thing, like, this weekend, we basically, like, obviously, and I think it's a valid point, is that the whole thing was like, this is supposed to be a defensively sound team. And within 20 games, we're talking about Kevin Sheets playing right field again. He played right field in both half of a doubleheader. We asked Grifol about it beforehand, and he's just like, we've touched home plate 34 times. So, we gotta mix in some offense somewhere. Like, yes, that's our goal. So yeah, I think there's like some situation of, all right, we knew we were gonna be a pitching and defense team, but like, it's kind of like the difference between like, I was talking to another reporter saying like, oh, they didn't sign Martin Maldonado for his offense, and I was like, there are levels between we didn't sign him for his offense and he's 2 for 33. Like, and there's levels between like, we're a pitching and defense oriented team and like trying to literally win games while scoring 2 runs a game. Like, they split their doubleheader the other day, and it was like one of their better days of the season, really, because it actually included some win. And it was still lowered their scoring average somehow. Like, and it was weird because, they really had a chance to break the nightcap open several times. They went 1 of 12 with runners in scoring position. That's theoretically in a vacuum a fluky performance, and they should have won maybe going away or comfortably or not sweating out a 2-inning 1-run Davey Garcia save. But they're batting 143 with runners in scoring position, with like a 30K rate. It is somewhat fluky because they have like a 192 BABIP with runners in scoring position. Somehow the Twins are actually worse than them, but even like the traditional molds of where their offense would pick up, like, they've been so awful with that runners in scoring position situation, and they're so awful as an offense as a whole. Like, how much regression can you really count on? But yeah, I think you're already seeing some of the plan being punted a little bit with not only what Grifol is doing, but you're adding Robbie Grossman and Tommy Pham, and everybody's touting how those are going to be, very professional at bats that are obviously much needed. But how do you fit in all these corner people with what they're currently doing? You don't want to sit Sheets because he's been one of your best hitters. Eloy is theoretically one of your most stable routes to offensive production. Not to mention not giving up on Andrew Vaughn, who looked a little bit better finally in the last game of the doubleheader. This is not all going to fit together in some way. And, normally it's going to take care of itself, but it seems like it's adding a lot of people who don't necessarily fit into the defensive plan, because just like the offense is such a 5-alarm emergency.
Yeah, that's a good point, James, because with this strategy, Jim, if this were any other season, you and I would be angry that the White Sox only allowed 7 runs in a 3-game series and lost that series because they only scored 4 runs. But with how quickly this team in this season has just popped the balloon, it's just like shrug emoji. Yeah, this is kind of expected. Like the run prevention side in this series, it worked. They held their opponent to just 7 runs. And more times than not, you should win that series. But until...
With 2 Major League debuts!
And 2 Major League Baseball debuts, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. But yeah, until this offense gets fixed, like... Until they can consistently score 3. I mean, they don't need... If they could continue this run prevention streak here, Jim, they don't need that many runs. They could go on a little mini run of, say, win 5 out of their next 10 games if they could just score 3 or 4 more consistently.
Yeah, it's, talking about the runners in scoring position numbers, and it reminds me of like a lot of times and stretches the White Sox have found themselves into where, because they don't draw walks, because they aren't hitting the homer the way they were supposed to. In fact, they're miserable at it this year, and also bottom half in doubles. So you can't even say they have doubles power, but it just, the innings, whenever they have scoring threats, they just get prolonged until you reach like the weak part of the lineup. And Martin Maldonado is at the plate, or Lenyn Sosa is batting 5th, or Corey Lee is batting 5th, or Kevin Pillar is batting cleanup. Like they only have so many hitters who provide credible at bats on a regular basis, to where eventually, like as long as like the opposing team waits them out or limits them to 1 base at a time, you'll eventually get to the, most of the White Sox offense is underbelly. I think that's probably the way to put it. It's like 85% underbelly. So like once you get past Gavin Sheets and, maybe, Robbie Grossman, although he's cooled off a little bit too, like you just run out of guys who are really going to make a pitcher work. So that's why I think while the BABIP number is fluky to a certain level, it's also, just because of their lack of instant offense, it all comes down to just kicking the can until you get to somebody who can't actually get the run home. But yeah, I think at this point, if you're counting on the offense being largely this miserable, even though the weather will warm up and probably there will be more homers hit, like it becomes a matter of like individual dignity, looking for upside, looking for guys who will be members of the next good White Sox team, like Garrett Crochet is cool. Basically like starting pitchers. You have Crochet, you have Nick Nastrini, you have Jonathan Cannon, who had nice debuts. And that's kind of what you're hoping for. They're probably going to get the loss because they're going to give up a couple runs over 5 innings, and that's going to be too much when the front half of the bullpen comes in while they're trailing. But you just want them to feel like, oh, they're not just fodder. I had a Cannon fodder headline all lined up if that start went disastrously, but he dodged that for a day. But that's what you're looking at. Like when you have, Chris Flexen failing, and you have this old roster that's already not delivering, it becomes a matter of, which guys do you try to patch spots with, like the Tommy Pham, Mike Clevenger types, to just get by on minor league deals, versus are we calling this guy up too early because it's an emergency, and we're going to go back into that circular problem where we're not learning how to win, and then they get to the majors and they're not winning, and it just becomes a cycle of everybody just trying to preserve their own interests and nothing ever coming together.
Are you saying Paul DeJong, Jim, is not a future core piece of the Chicago White Sox?
Well, credit to Paul DeJong. Like he was one of the pillars of their like run prevention. Actually, Nicky Lopez too. Like his metrics defensively are what the White Sox thought they would be. So the two of them are not a terrible example of like Getz's up the middle strategy. It's just like once Luis Robert exited and Martin Maldonado just offering nothing, it's there's still 2 up the middle positions to cover. And DeJong and Lopez are not the type to cover for that.
Yeah, DeJong now tied with Sheets with the team lead of 3 home runs apiece, and they both have 4 doubles. So as expected, Paul DeJong is leading or tied for the lead for the Chicago White Sox in home runs and doubles, like we all expected in 2024. All right, sarcasm aside, let's talk about some good things that did happen in this previous series for the White Sox, and that is the MLB debuts for Nick Nastrini and Jonathan Cannon. Nastrini and Cannon both went 5 innings. Nastrini, we'll start with him. He allowed 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 1 very big home run. but he only walked 2 and he struck out 5. 60% first pitch strike ratio. That's very good. And he had a 28.2% whiff rate against the Royals. James, how did Nastrini feel about his performance after the game?
He thought it went pretty good. He was mostly like grinning ear to ear and really happy just to be up. He thought he was pretty clear on the diagnosis of his one mistake pitch to Pasquantino. He felt he pulled it and then it flattened out in the middle. But like his fastball played throughout the game. Got one first strikeout on a changeup. It's kind of a weird, like Lucas Giolito's type of high changeup that didn't really go where he wanted to, but it's mostly a pitch that just has to exist and move the way it's supposed to and establish that it's there to set everything up for him. His velocity was like slipping down to 92 in his final inning of work, and things got a lot more messy. And obviously, he's a few more feet from having a pretty ugly line at the hands of Bobby Witt Jr. But I think for someone who had pneumonia at the end of spring training and really didn't get past like 80 pitches at any start all year up to this point, he generally came out fiery and looked really good, and his command didn't abandon him in any huge way until late when it seemed like there were other signs of tiring alongside it. I think you got a general good concept of him just as long as that kind of stamina improves and boosts and continues to grow over the course of the year.
So is that what Eat the Cats and the White Sox are going to be paid attention to when Nastrini makes his next start? Is that velocity? Like, how big of a concern is that for the White Sox perspective?
Probably not huge just on its own. I think they'd probably say that 92 would have played in that inning if he wasn't kind of pulling to his glove side really inconsistently. And that's probably more where you look at stamina than like thinking his velocity downs because he's hurt or anything like that. So I don't know if like that's exactly the watchword. It's more like how if his delivery starts to fall apart near the end, which it seemed like it must have been doing to produce the results it did. But I think you expect that to kind of slowly edge up as you stretch him out a bit more, because he really kind of had a weird first week of the season, last week of spring situation. So I think it was understandable, and I think the stuff played the way it's supposed to. He certainly had scouts who still put reliever tag on him or wonder if he's ready command wise, but I think he got by on stuff enough where you can expect command to grow like any young starter over the course of his season.
Jim, how did you feel about Nastrini's first start with the White Sox?
Well, especially early on, like the first three innings, first 11 batters, probably executing on the whole as well as you could possibly expect him to do. Like the changeup, I think, was the weak link, and normally that's maybe his best secondary pitch. So like there is upside there. When it came to mixing in the slider, the way he set the agenda with his fastball, all of that was remarkably efficient, given that that's not Nastrini's calling card necessarily. But I mean that's kind of what jumped out to me. And my concern, I think, would be the next start maybe facing a better offense. Maybe if he runs into that 25-30 pitch first inning, how will he rebound? Will he be able to brush it off and maintain his stuff, or will the decline in his stuff arrive sooner, like in the third inning, to where like the start is going to be shorter? I think that's going to be my concern. But I mean, like, we talked about with Garrett Crochet, that was the same thing as well. Like, what does he look like when he throws his first 30 pitch inning, in the second inning, and he still has 3 more innings the White Sox want him to cover? Like, how can he rebound? Like, there's no fault in him not creating that scenario for himself. So it's more of just something I'm monitoring, waiting to see what happens and how he responds, versus like mad at him for not doing. Otherwise it was great. And it'd be cool just to see a little bit better changeup execution, unless it happens to be that it is like the Lucas Giolito changeup, to where high ones he gets away with just because like they never are able to time it up.
And then Jonathan Cannon, it should have been 5 scoreless innings for Jonathan Cannon. Maybe he goes into the 6th inning. Dominic Fletcher spun out in center field, fell down, and that ended up being a 2-out double instead of being the 3rd out in an inning. Of course, the next batter, Adam Frazier, singled right back to Fletcher in center field to just add more pain to slipping out there in the outfield, and the Royals scored their 1 run against Cannon. But in his last 3 innings of that start, Cannon only allowed 2 base runners, a single to Bobby Witt Jr. and a walk, and that was the only walk that he had in his outing. He struck out 3, Cannon's first pitch strike rate was 63.2%. So just like Nastrini, they were able to get first pitch strikes, which is great to see from young pitchers. The chase rate was 97.7% for Cannon, especially effective with his sweeper against right-handed hitters. I was mostly seeing in how the sinker was going to do against right-handed hitters, but that sweeper could be a pretty effective weapon, James. The one concern that I have, though, is that his whiff rate, so he's able to get guys to chase out of the zone, but his whiff rate was only 12.2%. And the reason I'm concerned, James, as we saw in the Cannon start, is he learned very quickly allowing that much contact with this type of White Sox defense could be dicey for him in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he is. I think going into this offseason, he wanted to miss more bats, but the knock on him has always been like his fastball shape doesn't lead to like particularly a lot of missed bats, and he's never missed bats in college, and he hasn't been really missed bats a lot of in the pros, and even scouts coming out of AAA were saying like they weren't sure about him because he doesn't miss enough bats. Like that's never going to be like the strength of his game. The fact that he's going to get them out of the zone or chasing, I think even the goal of that for him is largely to produce weak contact. He was really good at getting ahead. He put himself in situations where they would chase, where they would reach out and poke balls to his infielders. I thought his changeup looked really good for a pitch that he didn't really throw that much last season and worked on a lot and how to pronate it in the offseason and really dove into high-speed video. Like everything looked really promising. I would have liked him sitting more towards the 95, 97 that some reports had him at last year than like very consistently 93, but he pitched very aggressively and fearless with it. Like his first pitches, like all throughout the first inning, starting in the major leagues, were just challenging guys with 93-mile-an-hour sinkers and not being afraid. And he got like, I think Bobby Witt like reached 111 on exit below on him, but it was right in the dirt. So he was achieving what he wanted to. It's just, it's not the big margin for error arsenal. It's an arsenal built to play in front of a top defense that the Sox thought they were going to be entering the season, but I don't think they've been that close to it just yet. It's a real starter package if you can be that level of consistent with the strike throwing, but it's not going to have that error proof nature to it that the best Nick Nastrini outing will ever have. It's just because he has to involve his defense in some way. That's how he operates.
Do you think sinker ballers like Cannon, Jim, that have this high contact rate, not generating crazy whiff rates like we see with other top end starting pitchers, do they have staying power in today's Major League Baseball?
The best ones do. I think it's, when it comes to the, I don't know, like you would say like the 55% ground ball rate guys versus like I'm throwing numbers out there, but like 65% ground ball rates to where like they just, the Dallas Keuchel in his prime type to where they're just demoralizing hitters and broken bats and stuff off the end of the bat, like really hard to lift them. Like there's always a place for those guys. I think, there was a little bit of an absence when it came to the high fastball. I don't think you can call it a fad because it has staying power, but everybody chasing the high fastball ride and whiff rate. That's not the best for everybody. I think there's been a little bit of adjustment in terms of some pitchers coming back down to the lower parts of the strike zone because that's where their pitches work the best. And so like there might be, room for more 55%ers if that's indeed, what they're committed to. I think with Cannon, like watching him last year and watching him in AA and talking to, some guys around the Barons and trying to figure out like that 6-pitch arsenal he's working with and trying to figure out what he could miss bats with. It always seemed like he was trying to avoid that or trying to ascend past that 4th starter, 5th starter profile of he can get the occasional strikeout and he can get the ball in the park, but like also if a really good offense can give him hell. And, even like a Kansas City offense, if the contact is breaking the other way, can lead to a short start. So he wants to leave less in the hands of fate. And so that's why he's trying to miss more bats and trying to do more with his, array of breaking balls and paring down his arsenal, I think is probably a concession a little bit in terms of being the best Jonathan Cannon he could be, which is somebody who is not going to get 200 strikeouts in season probably, but if his strength is one, filling up the strike zone, and then like being efficient enough to be able to throw 6 innings when he is getting those breaks, that has a lot of value in the game, I think, as we're seeing, because back end starters, like guys who can qualify for the major league ERA title, they are talented, like they are useful. Even if they have a 4.6 ERA, throwing 162 innings always has a place. So that's why I think, his arsenal doesn't, it's not terribly impressive, but it also doesn't scare me in terms of like, he should be able to find something that works as long as he's able to maintain that, 93, 94 velocity. And like, if he's able to, reach what he had touched in previous stretches of his minor league career, then maybe there's a little bit more upside still.
Yeah, I think he's going to be tough against righties, James. With that sinker in the outside corner and opposing hitters looking for that sinker, especially if they're down like 1-2 in the count, and he flips his sweeper at them. Like with his first strikeout against Salvador Perez, I know Salvador Perez will swing at anything, kind of like Javier Baez. But with that type of strategy moving forward, like I like that angle of attack against righties. I need to see obviously more from Cannon to see what his strategy is against lefties. And to your point, he didn't throw a single changeup against the Royals right-handed batter. Maybe that's a difference maker for Cannon to staying long-term in the major leagues and have that staying power, is his ability to get lefties out.
Yeah, I mean, he spent kind of like the whole offseason just figuring out how to throw it with his hand in a way that he could repeat. And he felt like once he was able to mime it out and see how the action was on video, he's able to repeat it, so that he previously didn't really have that kind of insight to just how he had to manipulate it with his hand out in front of his delivery. So it seems like something that he's racing to a bit or taking to. He's like a very energetic about pitch design. At one point he was like, I asked him like if he's kind of always coming up with like ideas for pitches, and he's like, I had 6 pitches. I obviously have a lot of ideas. Like he's kind of bursting forward with all these like, if anything, like they're going to constantly be knocking off pitches of his arsenal. He'll be coming up with a new one, like in its place, whenever. So I think the potential for growth is there. I think he finds ways to kind of add pitches and throws them for strikes like very quickly. That's kind of the separator with other guys that actually pitches, is like if they're spiking every time, it's not really something they can take into a game. Whereas he doesn't get this like extreme movement or snap to it, but he can kind of find like, oh, this is how you throw it and grip it and throw it for a strike, and it kind of introduces just a different look very easily. So it doesn't have like maybe that power arsenal to it, and he doesn't come with this angle that's really inclined to get a lot of whiffs, but can kind of add wrinkles and pitchability to his arsenal seemingly pretty easily for a 23-year-old. That I don't know if it gives you hope of him becoming a strikeout artist, but gives you hope of him kind of figuring out ways to wriggle out of different at-bats more and more as he goes along.
I will also I should mention, Erick Fedde pitched really well for the White Sox against the Royals. So far in 4 starts for Erick Fedde, cap tip to him, a 3.10 ERA. He's just averaging about 5 innings per start, a little more than 20 innings this year, and he only has 19 strikeouts. But 8 runs allowed, 7 of them earned. Fedde's allowed 5 home runs. So that's how opposing teams are currently scoring against Erick Fedde. If he could figure out the home run issue right now that he has early in the season, if he can prevent home runs happening, the White Sox here, Jim, like when we were there, we were in Nashville for the winter meetings, and we had a feeling like this was a very Brian Bannister free agent signing, and even Bannister went on Twitter explaining the reasoning why the White Sox brought in Fedde. So far, after 4 starts, for the little amount of money they signed Fedde for, it appears to be a good first impression of Fedde to the White Sox.
Yeah, all the pitches I think are as advertised. When I watch them, I think my biggest concern is like the third time through, 5th, 6th inning tends to get a little bit dicey, where his either location is a little bit looser, or like his, stuff lacks power, or just the novelty is gone to where like the swings and misses aren't happening. Contact's a little bit harder. Can't quite close out that sixth inning. That makes him like the, I guess like a real number 2 starter so far, but like everything else is there. The pitch mix is there. The way they play off each other, I think, is working. I think it's just a matter of like when he does make a mistake, because he isn't the most powerful pitcher out there, they can go a long way, especially like to right field. Windswept right field at guaranteed rate field, that, you can get some cheap homers that way, that I think like did not really affect him in the KBO when he was posting a 2 ERA there. Probably the difference maker, but for the money they paid and for, you think about like, what if they didn't land him? What if that, Scott Boras mystery team, I think it was the Mets that ended up being,
right.
What if they, gave him 2 for 18 and all of a sudden the White Sox miss out, and what does the rotation look like now? Because I think 2 for anything less than 20, I think if you're paying Fedde, below 10 million a year for 1 or 2 years, I think is probably a reasonable investment given how teams are avoiding like even like Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery type commitments. I think it was a smart move by them, and just good job by Chris Getz, I think, landing a Boras client and stiff arming some competition, doing enough, and, making the White Sox a compelling landing spot for a guy that they would be a huge mess without when you consider everything else that's going wrong with the rotation.
That was a historical moment in the history of podcasting together, listeners. In the 11 seasons that Jim Margalus and I have been podcasting, is the first time that we ever congratulated a White Sox front office executive for outbidding another team for a Scott Boras client, and on how that is working out for them. That has never happened in our 11 seasons podcasting.
Andrew Jones might have been the other one. Maybe
we were podcasting when Andrew Jones was flying.
Yeah, but I was just trying, that was like 3 million, I think. So yeah, I'm trying to think of any other, similar cases, and that's really it.
Carlos Rodon doesn't count because nobody was in the Carlos Rodon market, and that worked out great for the White Sox in 2021. But yeah, that's history right there. That's a first. Congratulations, White Sox, signing that Scott Boras client. Finally paying off dividends.
Trying to think of who else was bidding on Keuchel. Maybe it's hard to remember for reasons.
What an off season that was.
Philip has just lost the respect of the youth league football team he coaches. He was asked what New England should do in the draft, and his answer was objectively terrible. The Athletic just wrote a great article about this, but Philip doesn't have the Athletic or the respect of a boisterous group of 11-year-olds who once looked up to him. Learn from Philip's error, get the Athletic, and get the info you need to speak draft fluently.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
All right, so those are the positives. A little negative here. The White Sox, in my opinion, have a Martin Maldonado problem. Jim did an excellent job breaking down this particular issue on SoxMachine.com. So if you haven't gotten a chance to read his excellent work, go to Sox Machine, read it. I don't feel like we should rehash it because it'll be like 30 minutes going through everything that he painstakingly went through to point out all the flaws in Martin Maldonado's game right now. Where my thought, Jim, after reading your work, is that we as an industry, and I've been texting you guys this as well, we need to figure out a way to quantify pitch calling. Now, I went to the interwebs, and friend Harry Pavlidis tried to do this back in 2015 on a metric that he called game calling runs above average. But I'm not seeing that metric on Baseball Prospectus, so it appears that pursuit has been shelved. And there isn't much publicly about this topic. Many people have tried, but nothing is sticking right now. And until we publicly figure out as an industry to calculate how a catcher impacts the game with their game calling, this soft skill, to me, feels like a foolproof argument for Pedro Grifol to justify any playing time for Martin Maldonado, no matter the game situation. Because James, you are right to ask that question post game about a tight game and having a runner in second base, and Maldonado is batting. Stuck with Maldonado because of his quote unquote game calling, even though it burned the White Sox later in that game. If a pitcher's throwing well, Grifol's going to give Maldonado credit, Jim, because he's calling a great game back there. If a pitcher's not throwing well and Maldonado's catching, well, it can't be Maldonado's fault, Jim, because he's not throwing the baseball. This soft skill is what is going to justify Grifol to continue to play Martin Maldonado in 70% of the games in the next couple of months. And I just can't take it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the culture thing all over again. It's, invisible, flavorless, odorless. You don't know it's around. There are no detectors for it. And with Grifol, you can't trust him on this because he's going to say whatever answers the question that day, whatever I think sounds the best. And there's a difference between whatever sounds the best and what's actually right, or having to give the tough answer to avoid impossible answers down the road. I mentioned in my post talking about Yasmani Grandal and how Grifol trashed Grandal's game calling after the season. After Grandal is no longer an employee of the White Sox, that's when the criticism came out. But when it was after the trade deadline and Grandal still getting a lot of playing time, and Carlos Perez, who doesn't really appear valued by anybody, but the White Sox had young catchers to play in Grandal's stead, and he said, well, we have to play Grandal because we really need the kind of veteran know-how that he's providing. And Corey Lee is saying the same thing. I'm learning a lot from Grandal. I'm soaking it all in. And then months after the season, oh no, it was actually garbage. And that's why Drew Gutierrez here. And now Martin Maldonado is going to come a month later, and we're going to really stress this game calling thing because apparently nobody was doing it right last year. But when Grifol was in position to actually do something about it or say something about it, he didn't say anything about it. Same thing with culture. The culture's happening. We're building the culture. It's great. We're getting there. We're approaching it. Oh, it never actually happened. And we're going to have to figure out how to do it next year. As long as you can't trust Grifol to ever make a tough call about a veteran he might upset, or a veteran that other people might be upset about if he calls out, then you can't judge him as a talent judge or as a fit judge or anything like that. And so you're left to your own devices, and you're left to go with what your eyes are telling you. And what everybody's eyes are saying is well, I can read StatCast. There's a lot of blue there. I can, read his, slash line. That's awful. I can watch him behind the plate, and there are a lot of balls that are dropped or boxed and then, I think what got me writing about it was that throw to second when he knows Bobby Witt's stealing. Kopech didn't do a bad job of holding him. He had a pickoff throw. He was pretty quick to the plate. Steve Stone, who is not one to defend a pitcher on a jump. Usually Stone, I think when he errs, he'll say a good jump by so-and-so. And I think it didn't look like a good jump. It looked like an okay jump. He didn't spin his wheels, but looked like there was a chance for Grandal or Sebi Zavala to throw him out in previous years. And the throw didn't get there. In this case, he said, Witt got an okay jump and the throw was nowhere competitive. And that was at the point where just what are you doing? Or what, and not just, exasperated, but no, what is one thing you are doing here that we can actually see and trust, because we cannot trust Grifol one way or another to say what's going well or what's going poorly for, I guess you can trust him to say what's going well, but you can't, like, he spins a lot of things going poorly into something going well based on something you can't see, or the work he's putting in when the cameras aren't on. And you just can't trust that. And the results are that the White Sox are 3-15, and that Maldonado is on pace for like a 8 wins below average season right now. And the intangibles are not making up for it. I think what's a problem for the Astros is a crisis for the White Sox, because like you're seeing what happens when you don't have the pitching talent the Astros had, and you don't have the lineup talent that masked Maldonado's lack of production, and you don't have the media adept manager who's really good at either criticizing guys or spinning guys or even like distracting by being charming. Like Grifol has none of that going for him. So like Maldonado's just twisting in the wind out there.
James, there's got to be somebody else in that clubhouse that appreciates Maldonado for what he is outside of Pedro Grifol, right? Like, does Ethan Katz appreciate what he brings to the pitching staff?
Yeah, Ethan Katz has spoken highly about Maldonado, and as much as your point is well taken about like a pitch calling metric, like they would probably say like that's like an umbrella to put all the game prep or, you know, pitcher management or, you know, talking with guys about attack plans and noticing details, noticing tipping and stuff like that he can bring to it. It's just generally like it gets boiled down, especially with him working with Crochet and then, you know, working with both the debut starters, is like he's like this arm of player development where the value is, you know, yeah, you can wind up siphoning off credit from other players to him in some way. But this is a team where, yes, they were reticent to speak ill of Grandal on the record during his time here, but like they are a team that employed Grandal the last 4 years, who was not revered in that aspect. And now you see them kind of overcorrecting towards like, well, we'll just take no quantifiable production whatsoever to make sure that we can work with something that we feel like is a softer landing here. And I don't necessarily have a reason to be skeptical that Maldonado is that great in terms of game planning. It's so diametrically proposed as like being able to do anything physically at like a major league level on the ball field. And I think there's probably some degree of like, well, we don't care what happens if Nastrini and Cannon and Crochet all come out of this season feeling a bit more confident about what they do, or having a knowledge base to succeed and be cagey, crafty pitchers later on in their career, even if we are just stranding every single runner at second base that we get up with the middle of the order at some point. But for a team that's just like now going through this day-to-day grind of like, it's so impossible to win games, where it's so hard to have any good feelings in the clubhouse, where we're just getting our head kicked in like every night. It doesn't seem as it's an easier thing to afford. Like we're just going to put a lineup spot in concept, but when the day-to-day things are so ugly and so bitter to get through, and it's so hard to kind of keep spirits up as these losses pile up, it feels like, well, couldn't we get this another way? Couldn't we lean on other people? Couldn't we have him contribute in ways that aren't handicapping us offensively so much? And isn't Corey Lee ready at a certain point to maybe take on a bigger part of this load, since Corey Lee's been under Maldonado's tutelage for probably 3 years now, not just like, you know, spring training in the first part of the season. I would think that April's not really when you would expect this transition to come. And certainly they're probably hoping that like Maldonado would not be as exposed by everyone else on the team as much as he has at this point. But the kind of oppositional defiance that was presented about pinch hitting for him, even in a situation that seemed to kind of easily call for it, especially when you're saying, obviously Stassi's probably hurt a lot more than they've told us to any degree, but at least part of the idea is like, well, we don't want to call up somebody who's kind of iffy health-wise, because Corey Lee is going to be pinch running for Maldonado or pinch hitting for him so often. To not be willing to press that button in such a close game is concerning. It was a good question, a necessary question to ask him about a post game. I would just take more credit for it if Daryl had not asked for it first. Though he did after we were done for the presser and he got this chippy answer. Daryl looked back at me and was like, do you think that was a fair question to ask? Because like you literally interrupted me asking it to do it. So yes, Daryl.
I heard your voice. That's
you were in the right
voice that I heard.
We interrupted each other, and then like Pedro was kind of saying like, what situation? When we pinch hit him? And Daryl was like, I think it was the 8th, and I piped in like it was actually the 7th, but it was the same.
I give it another month. 1 month, that's it. Because right now Maldonado's weighted runs created plus is minus 57, which means he's 157% below league average offensively. And back to Jim's point, if Grifol is telling media people like James after games that he is managing the team to win games, but refuses to pinch hit for Martin Maldonado in high leverage offensive situations because he needs his pitch calling for those later innings. I don't know what we're doing here, White Sox. I don't. Because Maldonado's not on this team next year. Corey Lee, probably. So even with these young starters, at some point, you're going to need to transition them over to Corey Lee so he can get more familiar working with them and have a better relationship. So 1 month, Jim. May 18th. Yeah. That's what he gets.
I would even make it earlier. I would say that you can't make any kind of like wholesale changes in April. And my post wasn't so much about like Martin Maldonado needs to go. It's more of a matter of like, how long will this defense of Maldonado continue? Kind of like putting a stake in it, or at least like taking a snapshot of it. Like, here's how it is now. If this continues for 2-3 more weeks, is this defense going to be the same? Because like Grifol has never shown the ability to like pivot. It's always like, never thought of it. Oh, it's happening. Like that tends to be like how he makes a change. And like when he makes that change or demotion, it's very, very slight unless it's like the front office actually designating someone for assignment and like getting them out of the organization completely. It's never a benching or a sea change that Grifol's making himself. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And yeah, like I don't trust Corey Lee enough to say like, give him all the at-bats now, because like if you give him the at-bats now and he goes 0 for 24, which I think is within Lee's capabilities, and all of a sudden you have 2 catchers who don't hit, and then you have Adam Hackenberg who's struggling right now. Like maybe you have Chucky Robinson in Charlotte who has some major league experience, might be the third guy up, but like it's a mess if like Lee and Maldonado both don't click. So I think you do have to drag it out a little bit to make sure that you're not overexposing Lee, because if he sticks, like you'll find that out by having him start in mid-May versus, having him start in mid-April, and you'll have enough time over the rest of the season to learn how well he handles the league once it has a book on him. But if he gets exposed in mid-April versus mid-May, that's just one more month of another emergency the White Sox don't have the bandwidth to deal with. So that's why, like, I'm not hell-bent on Maldonado going. Just like, it is tough watching him, and it is what I feared when they signed him, was another leadership transplant that the body rejects. Like the White Sox body has just, it shuts down, spikes every organ that possibly comes in that might be able to help. And this would be another one that just like, they are not equipped to deal with the shortfalls for like the one marginal advantage they're getting. And kind of reminds me a little bit of, catchers are like offensive linemen when it comes to just, you'll never hear running backs say like, my offensive line sucks. Like you have to trust them to catch, to make them look good, to not like tell the hitter what's coming. Like there's a certain amount of respect you have to show the catcher, deference, so they don't embarrass you, or they don't, just the lack of clicking doesn't lead to like you getting demoted because you're just having a terrible time and the catcher is standing and you don't. So the pitcher's never going to like throw the catcher under the bus the way like, was it Cade McNown that the Bears offensive line like allegedly let sack? Like just said like, this guy's a jerk. Like we're just gonna, we're not gonna give our best effort and we're gonna haze him by defensive line crushing him. And so I think that's why you never hear running backs trashing an offensive line. I think it's the same thing with catchers. Like you have to adjust for catchers getting flattered and then, go with what's said, around the league, what the stats are showing. And then just, if you watch him enough, just, are you complaining a lot about the strike zone when Martin Maldonado catches? Are you having like, are you noticing like runners running wild when one, you have like the guy with the weaker arm, paired with the slower throwing righty, the righter who's slower to the plate. Like you have a lot of these issues that tend to repeat themselves when Maldonado's behind the plate, and quick way to solve it if the White Sox, eventually have the appetite for doing so.
1 month. 1 month.
I did once I shared Jim's story, I got a message from a Houston writer who basically said like, welcome to the discourse.
That's what I got on Twitter when I tweeted last week. Like, how did Astros fans deal with this the last couple of years? A hot topic in Houston. Topic.
He said that there were plenty of still like Maldonado lost causers on the Astros who were like, this guy is the best at getting us through games. We never should have gotten rid of him.
I got some responses of like 1 for $4 million is better than 3 for $58 million, which is Jose Abreu indirect sniping.
Yeah. That's not going well for Houston. A lot's not going well for the Astros to start the season. But yeah, the White Sox have a Martin Maldonado problem, something to monitor at least for the next month. And hopefully Max Stassi gets healthier. Hopefully somebody else in Charlotte or Birmingham, other than Edgar Caro, heats up here to merit some playing time in the major leagues, because I think this is Maldonado's last season in the majors. A couple notes. The White Sox are moving to Stadium. Not moving stadiums, moving to Stadium. It's an online channel that you could watch right now at watchstadium.com. It's free. The next steps for the Chicago White Sox is to negotiate cable and streaming TV providers to carry Stadium as part of their network. As the Chicago Sun-Times reported earlier this week that the White Sox, along with the Chicago Bulls and Blackhawks, will move to Stadium. There is a 6-month option in case Stadium is not ready yet for the 2024-25 NBA and NHL seasons. Nonetheless, though, that option does not impact the White Sox. The 2025 White Sox season will reportedly be on Stadium and not NBC Sports Chicago, as it's expected that Comcast will take NBC Sports Chicago off the air once this agreement has expired. And if you are like me and you have YouTube TV, you can watch Stadium right now on YouTube TV. It's part of the sports package that we add on. Same sports package with NFL Red Zone. Now, while I am fascinated by the inner workings of producing media content, here's where I'm concerned about this particular move by the White Sox. The thought with Marquee and the Chicago Cubs was when they launched their own cable network, Jim, that it would generate enough revenue for the Cubs to act more like the Yankees and Dodgers in wielding what would seem unlimited financial power. It hasn't for the Cubs. Using Reinsdorf's words, the White Sox had a sweetheart deal with Comcast. Now they won't have that level of TV revenue coming in next season. And we know that if the White Sox don't generate a certain amount of revenue, it directly impacts player payroll the following season. Fan attendance at Guarantee Rate Field is on pace to only draw a little more than 1.4 million, which would be the lowest full 162 game season attendance draw since 1999 for the White Sox. And going to some of these games as a full season ticket holder, I will be shocked if the White Sox exceed 1.4 million this year. I can already hear it, Jim. The built-in excuses of how is this team going to get better? Well, you have all this money coming off the payroll next year. You can maybe spend your way out of this mess. No, I can already hear it, Jim. I can already sense it. We don't have the fan attendance, and we don't have the same level of TV money, so we can't spend like we did in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, I mean, the one, I guess, defense of the White Sox is like every team is in this boat, or most teams are in this boat of like having to make it up as they go along. And like the Twins, I think, are an example of like a Bally Sports media property. They should have been able to capitalize on their status as favorites in the AL Central and winning the division and having like a pretty good farm system. And like it looks like a sustainable base of talent that needs some help from the outside, but just a lot of credible hitters, some intriguing arms. Like they should be able to put together a pretty good 26-man roster for the next few years. It's really a matter of like star power or just, getting pitching, getting offense, whatever. And like we saw them cut payroll and saying like, well, we don't know the we just don't know exactly what our TV revenue is going to be, even though attendance was up, even though TV ratings were up, interest was up, they just had no appetite to add because they've never had the deepest pockets. And, they've, they don't spend money to make money. They're not going to run in a deficit probably. So that's kind of the blueprint. And funny enough, they fell into the White Sox blueprint of like, well, we can't compete for top talent, so we're going to really load up on the bullpen because that's talent we can't afford. And then all those relievers got injured, and now they're having big runners in scoring position problems. And it looks very familiar to like the White Sox teams that tried and failed. So I think that's probably what's going to be happening with Stadium is just as TV ratings start with a 0 and as the attendance drops below 1.5 and drops in that territory where Jerry Reinsdorf does not have to pay any fees on tickets sold for rent because he's not reaching a certain threshold. Like it's all like pointing in that direction of just being a, the kids would call it a poverty franchise for a bit, just because they're not going to spend money to make money. And because they hired from within to generate no excitement when it comes to a new era. Like there was no Theo Epstein coming in and be like, we're going to be terrible, but I have something to believe in. It said we're going to be terrible, but the farm director who was there when it's terrible is now leading the charge and has no such experience in this role. And Reinsdorf's there anyway, probably going to kneecap him for any big moves. And so why should we believe in this? Becomes very nihilistic in a hurry. So yeah, I can see it spiraling. It just, I don't know if Stadium is a good move or a bad move because it just seems like a whole bunch of bad moves right now. Like the jig is up and the money's run out, the faucet's off, and now every team is more or less scrambling, similar to media in our regard. Like a lot of newspapers and TV stations, cable stations, ESPN cutting like the marquee places to land as a sports writer or a sports personality have cut jobs. So where do you go? And in our case, like we're doing what makes sense to us and doing okay so far, but it wouldn't have been anybody's ideal operation 5 years ago, but things change quickly. And so you have to be agile and you have to be afraid to fail. You have to be unafraid to fail because nobody really has a blueprint right now.
Does this end in us calling White Sox games?
Maybe.
Will Scott Reifert allow that? Brooks Boyer has entertained the idea of having fans. I know he's probably joking, but as a joke, he was thinking of having fans call games while they were in this transition.
Yeah, no, it's like we might be like, replicating their studio of just 3 people in their own, really save on overhead. Just invest in really good webcams and go from there.
Stadium's got nice TV sets. I was watching Robbie Hummel talk about the NIL law changes in Virginia and how it could impact college basketball there. So they have big names at Stadium. They even have Keith Law as well. I just don't know how they make any money right now. And that's the other part of the equation that they're going to have to figure out so it doesn't have long-term lasting impact by the White Sox. But in the short term, the same topic we heard last offseason, James, that we're talking about now in April, and as Jim pointed out, multiple teams' fan bases are going to hear November and December, even with this quote-unquote stacked free agent class that's coming up, and I've seen those columns already, and I kind of chuckled that we're already looking ahead to next offseason and who are going to be free agents when we have barely started the 2024 season. I guess we have wrote about everything so far on a national level when it comes to baseball. Aside from that, this might be a lingering topic that really impacts at least the long-term view of the Chicago White Sox, James, is the revenue problem for the White Sox moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not looking great to early returns in terms of attendance. And you and I were both talking to Brooks when he said that, the stadium that they're angling for, that's supposed to take them to a new level of what they feel like will make them able to compete annually financially. And the mirror image of that is that they don't feel like they necessarily can consistently until that happens. So that doesn't really make like a rosy view of the next decade, and certainly this year. And it's hard to imagine necessarily next year, or the uncertainty with the TV makes it, especially with them running back from a previous high in payroll where they didn't necessarily draw on the revenue to, capitalize on it. It makes you wonder when or if we'll face a similar doubt, because for the longest time until this run, that 2012 team, I think, was the highest payroll in history, and will take a similarly long cycle to get back up to the highs that were established in 2022 and 2023.
This could be a Pittsburgh Pirates rebuild, where it's taken the Pirates this long because they don't have the ownership willing to spend heavy amount of cash at free agency. Now they've made some strategic contract extensions, keeping Brian Reynolds and Mitch Keller, but it's taken a long time for the Pirates to turn their ship around, where we have seen other rebuild plans like the Texas Rangers, where they throw a ton of cash at the problem and they come away with the world championship. There's multiple ways to build a winning team in Major League Baseball. It's just that some are more painful to a fan base to endure than others. Keep an eye on how the TV money works out for the Chicago White Sox when news does become official, and that word could come in the upcoming weeks for the White Sox, Bulls, and Blackhawks. Back to baseball, the White Sox this weekend head to Philadelphia. The Phillies are 11-8. They're just 2 games back of the Atlanta Braves in the National League East. They have won 7 of their last 10 games. They have a 3-game winning streak going into this weekend. Offensively, the Phillies are not meeting expectations. Slow out of the gate. They're only averaging 3.79 runs per game. Run prevention on par. They're only allowing 4.1 runs per game. Your pitching probables for this series, Friday night starting at 5:40 p.m. Central Time. Garrett Crochet would make it to start against Spencer Turnbull, who surprisingly has a 1.8 ERA to start the season. Saturday, April 20th. This is a 5:05 p.m. Central Time start. It's Michael Soroka against Zach Wheeler, who's had tough luck to start this season. He's 0-3, but he has 30 strikeouts so far and just a 3 ERA. And Sunday, April 21st, a 12:35 p.m. Central Time start. Nick Nastrini against Aaron Nola. So the White Sox will have to face both Wheeler and Nola. But James, it should be a fun Friday night viewing for White Sox fans to get a chance to see and how Garrett Crochet does against these big name hitters of the Philadelphia Phillies, especially like Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper. Supposedly should have the advantage lefty-lefty, but Schwarber this year has crazy reverse splits. Schwarber's hitting .394 against lefties to start the season, and we'll see how he does against Trey Turner. But this is another big test for Garrett Crochet, and I know you're writing about him on SoxMachine.com on Friday.
Yeah, we had a fun chat about because he kind of has the lead extension of his delivery. But it's funny because like the actual intro point of why I talked to him, he's just like, nah, I'm tall and long armed. I get extension naturally. But he kind of talked about what he thinks about in terms of his delivery, which is actually not getting as far out as he can, because he kind of gets far out naturally in terms of like just thinking about shortening his stride at the offseason and putting himself in a place where he is more on balance with everything. But it was interesting to kind of hear how his mind works and how he thinks about his delivery, because he's this enormous tall left-hander, and the person he came up with of who he watches and really admires is Marcus Stroman, who Garrett was generous enough at heart to joke about. I'm a 6'6" lefty. I'm comparing myself to a 5'10" righty, Marcus Stroman. Having covered him a bit in the second half last season, is nowhere near 5'10". So he's Garrett's just clearly just a good, nice-hearted guy in general, and I think that comes through in talking to him. He's, if nothing else, like, just an aside, like, Garrett was never lacking for confidence. Like he didn't belong here, but like you could tell he's a smart, perceptive guy in there, but he's like so loose these days. He's clearly just like so much more comfortable in his own skin now that he's starting and doing what he thinks he should be doing, and feel like he's moving forward. Whereas it seemed like he was finding his role or uncertain because he wasn't healthy. The original story about him getting hurt in the playoffs, like he was actually feeling something before that game, but like felt unsure about speaking up and thought he should just soldier through it. Like, I can't imagine this guy now not like kind of sharing what he's seeing and thinking, because like he's just a lot more confident in what he's doing, and really assured of that he's in his right place right now, which is weird for the starter of a 3-15 team to be, but like you can just kind of see him a lot more sure about what he's doing personally, and it's really enjoyable to talk through right now. So I hope that comes through in the piece.
look forward to that. Again, you can read that on SoxMachine.com on Friday from James Fegan. Additional notes for this series. This is what the White Sox need to do to avoid this continuing trend of worst start in franchise history. The White Sox need to win 2 games this series in order to avoid tying the worst start in franchise history after 21 games. The White Sox need to win 1 game to avoid holding the record by themselves. 4-17, the 1942 White Sox started at 21 games. So if the White Sox get swept, we're still talking about the worst start ever in franchise history. The White Sox need to score at least 9 runs to avoid the fewest runs scored in the first 21 games of a season since the 1943 White Sox, who only scored 46 runs in their first 21 games.
And half of them were at war.
So, Jim, naturally asking you over under 8.5 runs scored by the White Sox in this series against the Phillies.
Well, the thing I'm wondering about is, are they going to get shut out again? Because they've been shut out at least once in all 6 series they played. And when you have Wheeler and Nola going, like, it would seem to be like probably going to be a 7th, or at least I'm not sure what the, I'm not a gambler, so I don't know what the odds would be. Like, it would be hard to say, like, yeah, they're definitely going to get shut out, but it seemed like the elements are there. Like, the White Sox offense is still bad. They only scored 4 runs in doubleheader against Kansas City, even though they had to see Kansas City's entire pitching staff, basically. So I guess I would say under, just because I want the White Sox to offer a pleasant surprise. And I realize, like, under feels especially skeptical because all it takes is like 1 big inning to be like, yeah, if you score 5 runs in the second inning of the first game, then you just have to score 4 runs over the final 22 innings or what have you. But this is that kind of White Sox offense to where, yeah, and then like they have to show that they have the ability to hit a pitcher like Nola or a pitcher like Wheeler, and 2 of them back to back. Like, yeah, I can see it being tough sledding, but my fear is that this is going to be like the series where the Phillies turn around, like, oh, Phillies off to a slow start, and this is regression fuel for them, facing this White Sox, lineup. Maybe not like Garrett Crochet. Maybe they just have to outlast Crochet, make them work hard for 5 innings, and then get to the bullpen, where just, it's kind of more or less landmines to where, like, Steven Wilson looks good, and, Michael Kopech looks good, David Garcia looks good until they don't look good. And then all of a sudden, it's a 3-run inning and things are sliding downhill. So looks like a tough series, but on the other hand, if you're looking at it in terms of like, I want to be entertained by baseball, I do like the Phillies a lot as a team, I like a lot of the individual talent they have. I enjoy watching them. So I will enjoy watching them play the White Sox, and we'll see if that means like the White Sox actually go toe to toe with them, or if it's just like they're tomato cans and they just get flattened in the first round KO and they throw in the towel.
Yeah, the Phillies are my World Series pick this season. It will be fun to watch Nola. It will be fun to watch how Wheeler perform against this White Sox offense. I am taking the under. This series kind of feels like last year's Toronto series. Were you there, James, for that series in Toronto last year where they got like outscored like 27-2?
Those were dark times.
Dark times.
I was there.
Yeah.
That was the Sebi post-game comment about like it seems like some guys want to crawl on a hole, but we can't do that.
Right. Yeah, gave us a lot of confidence. I foresee that happening this weekend, but at least it'll be entertaining if the White Sox do get outscored 27-2 in these 3 games. We will be sending James on the road to Minneapolis next week, so huge thank you to our Patreon supporters for that. We'll be covering, of course, recapping the games on SoxMachine.com over the weekend.
I'm looking forward, like maybe this will be off the record or more Veterans Committee chat, but I am curious, like, which White Sox from this year matches Sebi Zavala's sick of everything tone, which I think was kind of his personality for most of like the last couple seasons.
Miss him every day.
Well, that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. Thank you so much for taking a break from listening to the new Taylor Swift album to listen to this episode. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You could also listen to the podcast and watch our videos at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Appreciate those that are commenting over on YouTube page. If you can also hit the subscribe button while doing so, we'll greatly appreciate it. And of course, you can follow us on social media. We're on all the social media platforms at Sox Machine. You can follow James at JR Fegan, and you can follow me at Sox Machine_Josh. Again, a big thank you to our Patreon supporters, which you can gain full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox for just $5 a month at patreon.com/Sox Machine. James has been crushing it. Jim has been crushing it as well, even in the minor league stuff. Interviews with Sergio Santos and other prospects within the White Sox farm system. It's been fantastic content. It's been fantastic support, even though this is a 3-15 White Sox team that we're talking about, a historically bad White Sox team. But again, thank you to our Patreon supporters. And if you are not signed up at Patreon, you can do so at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, here for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margalus and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.
For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.